The magical world is full of countless rules that every now and then are difficult to understand. Do you remember that time when it wasn't possible to wish for an electric car? Or have breakfast after 10:30 in the morning? These and other rules make us wonder how they work. That's why in this video we'll explore the rules within the world of the Fairly OddParents and how they could be explained. So let's get started. And get ready, because some of these are pretty wild, not to mention the most lethal and dangerous rule that exists. The biggest rule of all is not revealing the existence of your fairy godparents. It's one of the most obvious rules, since throughout the entire series, Timmy always managed to hide the wishes he made, for example, by saying he got his stuff from the internet. If you ever reveal the existence of your fairy godparents, they'll be unassigned, and your memory will be erased so you forget everything related to the magical world. Additionally, for some sadistic reason, you'll be penalized with the physical alteration, like what happened to Crocker when he revealed his fairy godparents. But there's something very curious about this rule, and that's that there have been times when the fairy godparents are revealed to other characters, but there were no punishments. This can happen for two reasons. First, if someone with fairy godparents reveals it to someone who also has fairy godparents. In this way, it's like the effect is reversed and nothing happens to anyone. The other way is if the person you reveal the fairy godparents to doesn't believe in magic at all, like what happened with Jimmy Neutron, who thought these fairies were just holograms. Wishes can only be granted if they are requested by the godchild assigned to the fairy godparents, or if the godchild specifically asks for someone else's wishes to be granted. For example, when Timmy wished that Tootie could have his fairy godparents for a day. Fairies are weak against butterfly nets. This rule may sound very strange, but the truth is that the Book of Rules of the Magical World doesn't just include wishes a godchild cannot make. It also contains general rules of the entire magical world, which include the Tooth Fairy or even Santa Claus. And the odd reason that butterfly nets are practically immune to magic is that those nets can't catch anything with wings, including fairy godparents. Fairy godparents must fulfill the wishes of the godchild when they say the word, "I wish." If they don't say this word, no wish can be granted. Super wishes are not allowed. This is to prevent any wish from becoming too super and getting out of control. This is because the term super cannot be accurately measured by a fairy godparent, and a catastrophe is the most likely outcome. A child can wish for a magic duel to take another child's fairy godparents. Wow, this is a very extreme rule, which explains why it's so important to protect the privacy of your fairy godparents. With this rule, the other rules can be bypassed, so that the children can pass the tests set by Jurgen and do so with the best wishes. The child who loses will lose their fairy godparents and all the memories they had of them. Tooth-related wishes must be approved by the Tooth Fairy. Any wish that has to do with teeth cannot simply be granted by any fairy godparent, but must be approved by the Tooth Fairy. You can't wish for breakfast after 10:30 in the morning. This rule might seem nonsensical, but I think it's meant to promote healthy eating habits for kids. You can't wish for a world without girls. This would kill Cupid and cause a war due to the lack of love for kids. In fact, this rule was created thanks to Timmy. A fairy godparent cannot tell their godchild if another child also has fairy godparents. Here, a child has to find out on their own, or they can make a wish that isn't too direct but rather indirect. Like the time when Tini asked Wanda if she knew Juandissimo. This way, Timmy was able to find out that Remy Buxaplenty had a fairy godparent. Upon reaching an age when godparents are no longer needed, they'll leave. As we saw a few times in the series, children reach an age where they gradually lose interest in magic, and of course, start to forget their fairy godparents. When that day comes, the fairy godparents will no longer be necessary for that child, so they'll be assigned to someone else who does need them. although this rule can be bent, as with some of the other rules we've seen. For example, the time when Timmy wished to be an adult and his fairy godparents couldn't grant him wishes until Timmy proved that he still had the essence of a child. So really what you need is to keep thinking like a child to keep your fairy godparents, even if your physical form is that of an adult. Do not interfere with sleep. This rule was created thanks to Timmy, wishing that the world could exist without sleep, which caused many disruptions. After this rule was written, any sleep-related wish must be approved by the King of Dreams. Magic cannot be used against invisible teachers, sleeping clowns, French New Wave filmmakers, and people who wear glasses as a fashion statement. It is still unknown why this rule exists, but it is in the book. Wishes can only be granted with the godchild's voice, even if their voice has been swapped with someone else. For example, the time when Timmy swapped the voices with Chip Skylark, and that's how Chip was able to grant the wish for Timmy to get his voice back. Any godchild who has had their fairy godparents for a whole year without exposing them to the world can receive a magical anniversary. On this anniversary, they'll receive a muffin that can grant any wish, regardless of the rules, with the only exception being that you can't wish for a better tasting muffin. If multiple fairy godparents want the same godchild, they must have a boxing match in Texas to see who gets to keep the godchild. You can't wish for an electric car. Why? I don't know. If a fairy resigns from being a godparent, the position can be filled by another magical creature that grants wishes. For example, a leprechaun or a genie. Fairy magic cannot kill cockroaches. I don't know if this has to do with cockroaches being able to survive a nuclear war. Is fairy magic radioactive? You can't wish to be a famous actor or actress. This is because with this wish, many social rules could be altered. As we've seen, the magical world, the slight selection or holidays could be disrupted. Preventing true love. If any type of wish affects the love bond between two people, it can be punished. A clear example is when Vicky was in love with Chip Skylark's money, not him. So Timmy showed Vicky that in reality, Chip wasn't rich. This way, Timmy was able to use magic to get rid of Vicky. Another very clear example is when Timmy sent a love letter to Trixie, but he couldn't undo it with magic, because that letter came from Timmy's loving heart. So to get rid of it, he had to find and delete it online. The dominion of the children. We saw this in the musical School's Out. Here the children were dominant instead of the adults, and now the fairy godparents had to return to the magical world. Leprechauns can grant wishes instead of fairies if they are the last magical creatures on the planet. Any other magical being capable of doing so can also grant wishes. You can't wish for Christmas or any holiday to happen every day. This rule was created by Timmy wishing for Christmas to be celebrated every day, which altered time as it couldn't move forward. This caused Santa Claus to become overworked, leading to a lot of stress and chaos. You can only lend your fairy godparents to another person for a single day, but only if the person is twice as miserable as the godchild. Like the time when Timmy lent them to Tootie. Poor Tootie. Living with Beaky must make her life pretty miserable. One day in a certain number of years, a fairy godparent has to be bad. If during that day the fairy cannot be bad, they'll have to go back to fairy godparent school for 5 years. Anyone who finds a wand can't keep it and use its magic to fulfill their own wishes and those of others. Perhaps this rule was made so that all fairy godparents are extremely careful with their wands. If a godchild causes a holiday icon like Cupid or Santa Claus to become ill or unable to fulfill their duties, the godchild will be required to fix everything they caused until the holiday icon can return and resume their responsibilities. No one aside from Jorgen can change or modify the rules. If a child says, "I'm happy and I don't need my fairy godparents anymore," their fairy godparents will be assigned to another unhappy child, just like in the episode where Vicky becomes a child and gets Cosmo and Wanda. Fairy magic cannot affect super powerful magical objects or other magical beings whose power exceeds their own. So no, a fairy godparent cannot defeat Doctor Strange. Sorry to burst your bubble. Cloning wishes can only be undone when all the clones are in the same room. This happened in the early pilot episodes of the Fairly OddParents, where we saw Timmy have clones, and the wish could only be undone when all of them were in the same room. Rules can be erased from the book, either a small paragraph or even an entire page. But if the Magical Council finds out, you'll face the consequences. Maybe this rule was made for extreme cases where someone needs to erase a rule to save the world. Wishing to cease to exist is a wish that, despite causing serious problems, cannot be prevented. This wish practically works as a test for the godchildren, but it won't be permanent since eventually everything will return to normal. You can't wish for money. This is because it'll be considered counterfeiting, but you can wish for a method to obtain money, like a lemonade stand. No stealing. It's very clear from future rules that the magical world likes justice and honesty a lot. For example, once Timmy wanted to be able to attend the Crash Nebula on Ice show, but to get his tickets he had to forge them or take them from someone else, which would look really bad. Therefore, this rule makes a lot of sense. The completely forbidden wish is to wish not to age, whether for oneself or others. Another forbidden wish is to wish for good grades, which is why Timmy always gets Fs, since cheating is prohibited. If a fairy godparent loses their wand, they cannot be a fairy godparent until they recover it. It is forbidden to wish that all living beings look the same. This rule was created thanks to Timmy, as he wished that all living beings looked the same. Because of this, the fairies couldn't find their godchildren, which caused the fairies to accumulate magic and eventually explode. Time travel. These rules are completely strange, as if someone travels to the past and alters something in some way, they won't be able to return to the present in the same month when they left. But they'll be able to return in a different month, as long as they don't alter presidential elections, of course. So, if you wanna go back in time and throw a pie in your ex-girlfriend or boyfriend's face, there won't be any problem. You can't wish for the dead to come back to life, but you can wish for them to become ghosts, as Timmy wished for pirates to come to Dimmsdale, even though they were already dead. You can't wish for things that last forever to disappear. For example, you can't end time or matter. You can't undo wishes related to something authentic, as we saw in the 5 Days of Flarg. In that episode, Timmy wished for Mark to be able to fulfill his wish to celebrate this week from Yugopotamia. But upon finding out that the last day would be the day of Earth's destruction, Timmy wanted to undo this wish, which he couldn't do because the celebration was completely authentic. Therefore, holidays cannot be undone with magic. Even in the Book of Magical Rules, it is forbidden to wish for something pirated or counterfeit. Copyright also exists in the magic world. Humans cannot wish to be fairies. A godchild cannot transfer or gift their fairy godparents to others without Jorgen's permission. If a child achieves happiness and accepts that they no longer need their fairy godparents, they'll still be able to remember them, just like what happened to Vicky. You cannot cancel another child's wish. If the fairy godparents are taken away in a trial, the godchild has the right to get them back if they show obedience. If the fairy godparents are accidentally revealed, the godchild will lose their fairy godparents. So even if it's an accident, there are no second chances. If the child wants to become independent and live without their parents, their fairy godparents will also be taken away, as this is a sign of maturity and that they no longer need them. If the child wishes to be an adult, the fairy godparents can still be with them until they are reassigned, but they'll no longer be able to grant wishes unless the godchild proves to be a child. If the fairy godparents are shared with another child and one of them makes a mistake that causes the fairy godparents to be taken away, both children will lose them. Don't make wishes to win a competition. For example, this rule is self-explanatory. You cannot wish to win a competition or have one of your wishes affect the outcome, as that'll be cheating. For this, we have the example of when Timmy wanted to become smart, not to win the competition. But because being smart could make him win the competition, the wish was not granted. But there's a very interesting way to completely break this rule, and that is, with the use of magic, you can train or learn things to win the competition. Like the time when Timmy had his skating competition against Vicky, he wished to practice to get better and win. Do not kill or directly harm living beings. Just as you heard, directly. Because if you hurt them indirectly, nothing happens. Like the time Timmy Turner placed a tree in the middle of the road for Chip Skylark to crash his car. You cannot wish for a fake deed to cover a lost deed, as this would be like falsifying documents. And remember, the magical world is very fair. Respect the rules of the game. This rule can be helpful with the rules mentioned earlier that exist to prevent cheating in a competition. For example, when Timmy wished to be a kung fu expert, but he couldn't hurt Francis because it'll harm him or be seen as cheating. Another example, let's say you want to be an expert at cooking Italian food. You'll be an expert at doing that. But as soon as you want to enter a competition, or maybe help your friend who is competing, all those skills will disappear. You cannot wish for there to be no rules or for a fairy to tear a page out of the rulebook, unless a fairy does so of their own will, knowing the consequences they face. If a godchild accidentally breaks the rulebook and then it is taken by someone else, this new person will have all the power of a fairy stupid enough to grant any kind of silly wish. The godchild will have 48 hours to restore everything to normal, or else they'll lose their fairy godparents, just as we saw in the PlayStation 2 video game. It's time to review the most lethal and strict rule in the entire book. If a child makes a secret wish that affects the entire universe, the godchild and the godparents will be punished. All memories will be erased, and they'll be punished with 10 years of misery in their lives. In the case of the godparents, they'll also be banished to the magical world and cannot be godparents to another child. And those were all the rules in the magical world. Tell me, which rule did you like the most? See you in the comments!